I think the problem of addiction is not new. I mean, there were all this opium stuff that went on. If you look at the history books back in the beginning, in fact, I heard this thing on NPR recently that like all the big families, Rockefellers and the big banks and like the Mellons and all these, I mean, I don't want to mention the wrong names, so, but these big industrial families were all funded by opium money. Like all these big banks, these big corporations that all came from opium and these opium dens. And so I think in one way or another, we've been trying to, numb ourselves to our pain, right? So the first noble truth that the Buddha said, he sat down under the Bodhi tree for 6 years and practiced really hard. And it's said that he looked up one morning, saw a star, and got enlightenment. And that enlightenment was about me and the universe are not separate, right? So there is no I. But he really felt like people wouldn't believe him. So he kept to himself for a bit, and then his first noble truth that he came out with was, out of all that practice, was number one, life is suffering. Right? So that's a first noble truth, and that's a big component of our human experience. And everybody gets a dose of it at some time or another, whether it's through birth, sickness, old age, or death. Because everything is changing, and we don't always want it to change. If we get something good, we want to keep it, right? If we have a young, beautiful body, we don't want it to get old and crinkly and decrepit and not be able to, walk and not be able to control our health and not be able to control whether or not we drool and all the things that can happen to us and that do happen to us. So we suffer because things are changing and we can't control it. So we have two choices as human beings in these situations. Or maybe your child or your parent or your husband or your wife or your best friend gets cancer or whatever. It's always something. So we can either, as Nancy said, that the solution of addiction is kind of parallel to what Nancy's mom said, which is to keep busy, right? So that's a type of distraction away from our suffering. And then the path of Zen is more to face it directly. So one method is to numb oneself from it, whether that's taking heroin or smoking pot or drinking too much or whatever. There's this temporary relief, like, okay. But it's very temporary. And then what happens, the person becomes clear again, wakes up, is sober, and there's that same problem. There's that same bad feeling. So the practice of Zen is more, we had a teacher, Subhang's name, he used to rip open his robes and he'd be like, okay, just like give it to me, like what are you, like bring it on, let me face this, what is this? And that's a head-on kind of way of looking at the suffering rather than the temporary numbing, the temporary relief, the temporary busyness. I mean, that's a type of addiction too. The thinking about other things is an addiction that we all have. And so when we look, as Nancy was just talking about, it's just sitting there and breathe in, breathe out. What is this? I call it suffering. Let me see what it is. Come and get me. Who are you? So the Huayan Sutra, or Buddha originally said, all things are created by the mind alone. So there was this monk, and his name was Deo, and he went around for 49 years and said this teaching, all things are created by the mind alone. And one day this young boy, this young student said, yeah, you've been saying that, and that's good teaching, but where does the mind come from? And Deo was stuck. He couldn't answer. So our teacher, Zen Master Sung San, had a commentary on that. And he said, if you don't understand this, or he said, do you understand this? And he said, if you don't, go ask a tree. And this is the part where people think Zen is weird, when they hear the go ask the tree part. But he literally means that. Go ask the tree. What is mind? Where does mind come from? Because everything that we see and everything that we hear and everything that we experience is truth. So Zen practice means attain truth. So that's all about waking up rather than numbing down, right? But it takes a certain force and it takes a certain strength to do that. It's actually the easier path, but seemingly the harder path. Like it seems like it'd be easier to numb out from that question or from that pain of the human condition, but it's actually much easier to sit there in this moment. So you did have a teacher like Thich Nhat Hanh, who lost his whole country, who lost his whole family and everybody he knew, and saw massacre and bloodshed and every horrible thing that's much worse than most of us have ever even hadn't touched that much of that sort of suffering. And what did he do? He made up this mantra, and he would take steps and he would walk and say, calming, smiling, present moment, only moment. Calming, smiling, present moment, only moment. That is a very low-tech technique. But look what it did for him. Look what it did for him. So he was able to be in the middle of all that pain, stay in this present moment, as Nancy was talking about, return to his true self before everything. And then become the great teacher and monk that he is and help millions and millions of people with his teaching. It's really low tech, but really high class. And so I think there's a great meeting point for addiction and Zen, because there is that spiritual piece that people have to come to. And I would encourage anybody who's going through anything like that to use meditation and to come to the Cambridge Zen Center and bring your friends, and use whatever steps addiction programs can use in conjunction with meditation, because meditation can only help that. And anybody who's been through something like that, we say, perceive truth, right? And anybody who's been through it and can come out the other side of it, guess what? You can help a lot of people. So you can turn that pain and suffering of your own into your great bodhisattva vow. Right? So something bad becomes something really good. And that's the power of practice, because nothing is inherently good or bad. We have these experiences, they come to us. We buy into them sometimes through our laziness or whatever, but the minute we have that chance to wake up, we can transform anything. Very low tech. So you and the universe can become one, like that.